be disappointed or annoyed if you expect that this will be an evening that's politically correct. We plan on treating everyone with equal disrespect. Welcome to the show.
Historians have written down what great events might mean. They love their facts to be exact. They think that's really keen. They tell it like it was. We tell it like it should have been. Welcome to the show.
There are no fancy costumes. That's just the way it is.
The budget didn't run to scenery.
This ain't Vegas.
But you'll find here an atmosphere romantic and exciting, created for you.
By clever lighting.
Some tales we found were interesting and some were really boring.
Some stories left us close to tears while others left us snoring.
Some tales we found were dull and dreary, and others found rip-roaring. They'll be in the show.
There's tales we know you love, and there's tales that will be hated.
And some will be precisely true and some exaggerated.
We'll cheerfully quote what some people wrote, but be it clearly noted, we're not just misquoting. Ain't even footnoting. So let's greet this anniversary with some loud applause and cheers, and celebrate the foresight of those hardy pioneers. The Sing's managed to survive for 150 years. And if all goes right, it might survive tonight. So welcome, New Westminster, to your show.
You should take the tales we're telling with a giant grain of salt.
In the beginning, there was mud. There was ooze and a primeval mist. In the midst of this great swamp lived a primitive, simple, and unorganized people, struggling to survive, huddled together and desperate to find ways to cross the giant Fraser River that seemed to dominate their lives. But enough about Surrey.
On the other side of the great river, in a land with vast forests of giant fir trees, as yet unexploited by Macmillan Blodell, lived an ancient tribe, the Keekites.
For centuries, they had used the river as a watery highway. They knew its moods and used its bounty.
The Keekite occupied the shoreline, harvesting salmon and oolakan, and that ghostly creature of their mythology, the white sturgeon.
In 1858, New Westminster was not the bustling city it was later to become. There were no lumber mills, no giant bridges spanning the Fraser, no breweries.
Not even a casino.
St. Mary's Hospital was not there.
And the first May Queen hadn't yet been born.
There was only an impenetrable forest of pine and fir. Imagine.
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 Imagine now
That once there was a land unspoiled, where mighty mountains touch the sky. Ancient forests clothe the slopes, the giant Fraser flowed right by. On its banks
to fish and to die.
Every year was just the same.
The salmon ran and the unicorn came.
And this was the way their lives were arranged until the year that everything changed.
When along came the miners looking for gold, coming to a land that was uncontrolled.
People in London in charge far away said, don't let the miners take over that way.
We must bring law and order. We must build a stockade and then sell off the land so a profit can be made. So, the Royal Engineers were dispatched on this mission and were given their mandate by a top politician.
Colonel Moody and soldiers of the Royal Engineers.
Sir Edward Bulwer-Lytton, Secretary of State for the Colonies.
You are going to a distant country, not, I trust, to fight against men, but to conquer nature. Not to besiege cities, but to create them. Not to overthrow kingdoms, but to establish new communities under the scepter of your own queen.
Sir Edward enjoyed words and the sound of his own voice.
You, the soldiers of the Royal Engineers, have been specifically selected from the ranks of Her Majesty's Army. Wherever you go, you carry with you not only English valor and English loyalty, but English intelligence and English skill.
Later, Sir Edward would become a well-known writer of Victorian novels.
Whenever a difficulty is to be encountered which requires in the soldier not only courage and discipline, but education and science, England turns to you. In that distant region to which you depart, I hope that our national flag will wave in triumph on many royal birthdays, from walls and church towers that you will raise from the wilderness and will leave to remote generations as the bloodless trophies of your renown. Soldiers, you will be exposed to temptation. You go where gold has been discovered and greed inflames all passions. But I know that the voice of duty and the love of honor will keep you true to your officers and worthy of the trust your sovereign places in you. I have promised the Parliament that I will secure this promising and noble territory on the mainland of British Columbia from becoming the scene of turbulent disorder.
Considering the wild unknown into which Sir Edward was sending these sappers, the opening sentence of his novel, Paul Clifford, seems most appropriate. The book begins with one of the most striking sentences in English literature. It was a dark and stormy night. New Westminster, like Snoopy, has much to thank Sir Edward for. But now, some words of quite a different kind. My dearest Sarah.
A letter from Second Corporal George Hand of the Royal Engineers to his fiancée, Sarah Jane Crossland of Lancashire, England.
My dearest Sarah, after all the excitement of the departure from Gravesend, we settled down to our long journey to the Pacific colony. We arrived in this remote wilderness on Christmas Day.
These words from my beloved, from far across the sea, are written in this letter, that mean everything to me. And though they take so long to come, remote wilderness on Christmas Day. There was scarcely enough time to pull our crackers, finish the turkey, and sing a verse or two of Death the Three Kings when trouble erupted. The colonial governor, a fellow called Douglas, and our Colonel Moody could not agree where the capital city we had come to build should be located. They argued furiously.
He wants to put the capital where? Colonel Richard Clement Moody, commander of the Colombian detachment of the Royal Engineers.
Gentlemen, my mandate from the colonial government in London is clear. I am to select a site and design a capital on the mainland of British Columbia.
As governor, I have already declared the land around Derby, near Fort Langley, to be the crown property.
Sir James Douglas, governor of British Columbia.
We will build a courthouse, a jail, and a church.
Derby is too close to the American border.
I've had this land surveyed.
It is on the wrong side of the river. It is not safe.
Lots have been sold. Many lots. Lots of lots.
Your site cannot be defended against an American invasion.
My government has raised $60,000 from the sale of land.
I have found a better site nearer the mouth of the river.
Important merchants have bought property there.
On higher ground.
Government officials have invested large amounts.
Rich forests surround my site. There will be good land for gardens.
You will make many enemies in Victoria.
The highland is raised about the flood level. Enough lowland is nearby for a great seaport and a capital city.
I have been put in an untenable position. The Hudson's Bay Company will be furious. These important men will not allow...
I have been given the authority to choose the site. I can make it unapproachable to any enemy. As a military position, it is rare to find one so singularly strong by nature. This is where we shall build. We must keep the Americans out.
His argument has a certain contemporary resonance. As I was sitting in Starbucks the other day, exhausted after shopping at Walmart, sipping on a Diet Coke and browsing through a copy of People magazine and worrying about the future of softwood lumber, and wondering if Barack Obama will be coming to the Winter Olympics, I gave thanks to the way that Colonel Moody had managed to keep the Americans out. But I digress. Back to the debate.
And what sort is to become of those citizens of Victoria who bought land at Derby that will now be worthless?
You should let them grumble a while, and then offer them an exchange for land in the new capital at a somewhat higher price, of course.
Well, that might satisfy them, and the extra money from selling them more land at the new capital might prove to be very useful for the colony's coffers.
My dearest sir, so much has happened since I wrote you last. The question of where the new capital is to be built has finally been resolved. The governor himself came over from Victoria to read the proclamation.
July 20th, 1859. By command of His Excellency James Douglas, Companion of the Most Honorable Order of the Bath, Governor and Commander-in-Chief of British Columbia and Vice Admiral of the same, whereas Her Majesty the Queen has been graciously pleased to decide that the capital of British Columbia shall be styled the city of New Westminster. Now therefore I, James Douglas, do hereby declare and proclaim the town heretofore called and known as Queensborough, and sometimes as Queenborough, from henceforth should be called and known as New Westminster, and so described in all legal and official documents.
It had been a very hot day. The mosquitoes were being most troublesome, so I was more than pleased when the ceremony was finally ended. But we had a grand feast afterwards. There seems to be much confusion as to how this new capital had received its name. On our plans, Colonel Moody had called it Queenborough. Unkind visitors, mostly from across the water in Victoria, referred to it as Stump City. And yet, the governor announced it as New Westminster. I would like to tell you exactly how this name change came about, but nobody really seems to know. However, at one of our entertainments in the camp, we sang a song, and were able to persuade Colonel Moody himself to read a poem that Corporal Sinnott had written, summoning up from out of his fertile imagination how our newly built settlement got its name. I wish you...
You could have been there. Colonel Moody, honored guests, members members of the regiment, ladies and gentlemen, we beg to put before you the hitherto untold, and even possibly true, story of how New Westminster got its name. Be warned, close attention must be paid. Governor Douglas delighted declaiming all manner of matters in proud proclamations, but would not be good at the process of naming a town that was founded as his own creation.
The town that was down by the Fraser would grow and expand into land past its fortifications, proclaim a new name, get a marketing slogan to woo settlers who had some wealthy relations.
The road to the naming was most well-intentioned, but just as the best thought of plans go astray, it was thought unimportant what name had been mentioned. Naysayers just made up their own nicknames anyway. Some people from Victoria, I think you'll find, were the nicknamers who were most unkind. They called it Stump City, 'cause all around, all you saw were giant tree stumps stuck in the ground. They said that Stump City's a real disgrace, and really just a pimple on creation's face. A name like Stump City can do no good. Besides, it sits beside a stream of liquid mud. It's clear that Stump City must be renamed. Let's find a name of which we'll never be ashamed.
Perhaps it could be called Sapperville, or might be named Moody Town.
And now we've got our very own sawmill. When timberlands get our thumbs down.
And there's a swamp just north of the city that we're naming after Robert Burnaby.
And we like the name upstream from Delta, but we hate it down the river from the pit. It's the pits!
And we thought we might have to worry when we heard that Surrey might be it.
Oh, surely not. Let us tell you all in a hurry. We ain't sorry, we ain't Surrey. We're not Surrey, and we ain't sorry. We're not sorry a bit. Sadly, Stump City still remain, even though the people all complained and complained. And so for Stump City, what would be politic? We should name it for the Queen, so let's get off to London quick. Let's go.
Colonel Moody would now like to recite a poem written by Sapper Charles Sinnott concerning the naming of our capital by Her Gracious Majesty Queen Victoria. God save the Queen.
God save the Queen. All right, power delegation.
He sounds just like you, Charles.
All right, power delegation arrived in London keen to talk to some officials and maybe meet the Queen.
If you're lucky.
When they spoke to Queen Victoria, who was only 4'8", she said, "I'm already stumpy enough. Stump City's not appropriate." We told the Queen, "Your Majesty, I think that you're confused." But in a voice that shattered glass came, "Enough! We're not amused!"
Yeah, but we are.
Now, to call the place Queensborough is a very nice idea, but I have got a better one from dear Albert over here. Our palace here in London's in Old Westminster, you see. So if your name's New Westminster, Easter, you'll think of me. At once the courtiers grovelled, told Her Majesty, that's grand, and everyone gave credit to the top gal in the land. We love our new Westminster, but we hope we are not rude if we nickname it the Royal City just to show our gratitude.
Well done, sir. Well done.
Still as Stump City, it was known. Whenever folks from out of town desired to put us down, but out of Stump City, a great city grew. We call it New Westminster, and it's home to me and you. We're not Surrey.
I wish you could have been there. I must also report to you that now the camp has been settled, some of us men from the detachment have asked Colonel Moody that we be allowed to bring wives and sweethearts from England to join us. The Colonel, who is a good chap, has written to London asking the army to provide passage for you. I'm afraid it takes them a long time to arrange these things, but I live in the hope that we will be together again in this new capital soon, maybe by the start of the next year. I remain, as ever, yours.
Corporal Hand, we have received a letter from the Immigration Office, London.
Yes, sir?
It was sent on 14th November 1860. Dear Colonel Moody, with reference to your letters of the 14th August and 1st October last, directing us to provide passages via Cape Horn to British Columbia for the wives and families of 7 men belonging to the detachment of Royal Engineers stationed in that colony, I have to report that the Marcella...
The Marcella sailed on the 12th instant from Gravesend. Sarah's coming. When will she get here?
In just a few months.
I don't know how I can wait that long.
You'll be very busy. There's much to do before the ladies arrive. Trees to cut, houses to build, and streets to be laid out. In 1860, the first council elections were held in my new city. Henry Holbrook led the poll with 22 votes.
Mayor Wright is still trying to discover the secret of Holbrook's landslide victory.
The council's first item of business was to clear and lay out the streets.
We regret to draw your attention to the lack of originality given to street names. The north-south streets were called First Street, Second Street, Third Street, all the way up to 23rd Street, at which time the boundary with Burnaby was mercifully reached.
I was pleased to discover that considerably more imagination was shown in the naming of the east-west avenues. Names were given such as Royal Avenue, Queen's Avenue,
3rd Avenue, 4th Avenue, 5th Avenue.
John Sheepshanks, first rector of Holy Trinity Church.
I have caught rheumatic fever from my misadventures on the river.
This is quite another story. You'll have to read his book.
Well, this cannot be allowed to continue. This hut of yours, this wretched shack, is no place for a clergyman, a gentleman, a scholar.
I had become so habituated to my surroundings that I was rather surprised at this depreciatory view of my household.
What can be done? We have no money for a new house.
Well, when I return to Victoria, I shall begin a list of subscribers. I will head that list myself. In a few months, we will clear a space in the forest and to begin to build you a parsonage in keeping with your position. After all, you are representing the Church of England here.
And the governor was as good as his word. Within a few months, money was raised and a suitable rectory was constructed. But first, I had to survive the winter of 1862.
In 1862, by sheepsheds we've been told, the winter was extremely bad. Yes, it was bloody cold.
March the 8th, 1862. My new parsonage is not yet ready, so the Reverend Knipe and I share a small house where we are well looked after by an Indian lad. But the winter weather is another matter. It has been so cold that the Fraser River is filled with large floes of ice. It is a wonderful sight to see the huge fields of ice being hurried along by the rapid current, grating against the fringe of strong ice which clings to the shore until they have cut it, and it has cut them as straight and as evenly as a glazier cuts an irregular piece of glass with his diamond. And to see them, when brought to a jam, crunched against a projecting piece of land, and smashing up, and still borne on by the current, forming quite a mound of ice fragments, and to see them overlapping each other and forced onto each other's backs, and slipping about until broken or welded together by the frost. All this is striking, and the sound, perhaps, still more so. It is grand and solemn to hear morning, noon, and night that continual crashing going on. But will I survive the cold? Can I survive the cold? Was a frozen grave to be my destiny?
Winter's icy blast freezes my very soul. How long can this last? Till the frost starts to take its toll. Trapped here by the ice and cut off from the world outside, we'll make our own paradise. Watch as we ride and glide silently over the ice, and winter will be defied.
Despite all the discomfort and difficulties, it was wonderful how much the whole town would enjoy the great freeze of 1862.
Homemade sleighs skim the ice, hear their bells are jingling, hands stay warm, feet keep dry, and our faces are tingling, wrapped in furs the sleighs they ties. Oh, how smart they appear as we glide, 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 and we slide, slide, slide on the mighty Fraser, oh, broken from side to side. Hear the ice floes crack, wind is at your back, on a glassy track for your sleigh. Hey! Great surprise in store when from the Brownsville shore cattle's driven o'er the throng. shoot, shoot, shoot. No one gives a hoot. Though our bodies soar, we can score, score, score. As we glide, 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 and we slide, slide, slide on the mighty Fraser, all frozen from side to side. Mornings when I wake, a bath I would like to take. But first I have to break all the ice that's formed in my bucket. I can't even comb my hair. It's frozen, I do declare. And my frosted blanket there is so cold, all I can do is just chuck it. It's not that I'm frozen by fear. There are moments I love this frontier. But God, for once, please make it clear. Oh, why did I ever come here? Yes, it was bloody. Oh, Corporal Hand, you have decided to stay on after the other sappers muster and go back to England?
Yes, sir. I believe my future is here.
Sarah agrees with your plan.
After all the trouble it took to get her out here, she wants to stay on too.
And what will you do? How will you earn your living?
My father was a blacksmith. I have always wanted to follow him in that trade. And the late Mr. Blackie's family have a business for sale. My mate, John Woodcock. Oh, you know, must know him, Corporal Woodcock.
Oh, yes.
We're going to use our mustering out money to buy ourselves a blacksmith business. Woodcock and Hand, he wants to call it. Sarah thinks it should be Hand and Woodcock. Myself, I'm not bothered. We've written an advertisement in next week's newspaper. Woodcock and Hand, late W. Blackie, Blacksmith and Company, New Westminster. Woodcock and Hand, or Hand and Woodcock, respectfully beg to inform the inhabitants of New Westminster that they have taken over the above business and are now prepared to execute with dispatch all orders with which they may be favored. What do you think, Mr. Sheepshanks?
Very impressive. A fine advertisement. You shall have all my blacksmithing business.
Do you own a horse?
Sadly, no. But you shall have all my business just the same.
It is February 27th, 1864. Sarah and George are at home reading the local newspaper, the British Columbian.
Sarah, there's a new store down on Columbia Street. Take a look.
Oh, yes. John Murray begs leave to call the attention of the public to his carefully selected stock of family groceries, which he's prepared to sell at the lowest possible prices for cash. I shall pay him a visit.
If it will save us money.
And here's something that would be perfect for our daughters.
We have daughters?
We will, someday. This will be just the place for them. It's an advertisement for a ladies' school. Mrs. Moresby is prepared to receive a few young ladies as boarders. Parents entrusting their children to her care may be assured that they will receive all the comforts of a home.
We might have sons.
Boys under 8 years of age received.
And how much will this fine education cost me?
Terms, $30 a month, payable in advance, which will include the usual routine of an English education, writing, and arithmetic.
$30 a month? Is that all?
French, music, and other accomplishments extra.
Of course, there are always extras.
Look, there are references from Reverend J. Sheepshanks and E.H. Sanders, resident magistrate from Yale.
That's all very well for them. I don't expect they don't have daughters, so it won't cost them anything. Now, this is more interesting. Something for me to do while you're shopping at the new grocery store. J.H. Brown and J. Ellard. That's Jonathan Brown and James Ellard. There were sappers and the engineers with me. Beg to inform their friends and the public generally of Mr. J.T. Scott, the well-known and old-established pioneer billiard saloon on Lytton Square, and hope by strict attention the very best quality of liquors and a well-regulated saloon to merit a share of the public patronage. I must go. Oh, to support my old mates.
Yes, George, of course you must. But you'll come home and after a night drinking, what was it, best quality liquors, and wake up next morning complaining about how ill you are. But don't you worry, my darling. I found the cure for your hangovers right here.
Where?
Holloway's pills, imported from England. It says they will cure practically everything.
Oh, it's just another traveling medicine show. It's all flim-flam, mirrors and ballyhoo. You know what they're like. Roll up from your houses, stores, and canoes. Ladies and gentlemen, there's unbelievable news. Direct from London and his shop on the Strand, Professor Holloway's miracle pills are at hand. These pills have created scenes of enormous euphoria. They've even been tested, they say, by Queen Victoria. The news of their potent effect has been spreading like wildfire. They're sold by respectable dealers all over the empire. All illnesses, pains, and afflictions will now disappear. Yes, yes, New Westminster, the time for your curing is here.
Behold the latest, greatest cure of Holloway's pills.
They'll fix the worst of what you're cursed with, Holloway's pills.
If you have ulcers, fits, or gout, Holloway's pills will clean you out. The sufferer's best friend is Holloway's pills.
Good health for liver, stomach, bowels is always assured.
Venereal infections will be instantly cured.
Unsocial inflammation's gone when Holloway's pills are relied upon. No longer must these awful pains be endured. The finest purifier that the blood ever knew.
If you're for female irregularities too.
If indigestion makes you sick, or jaundice piles of a dull erotic, take Holloway's pills at once, whatever you do. Now everyone can be assured that Holloway's pills
Everybody takes them.
guarantee that you'll be cured of all ills.
Time the aches come, weakness or a debility.
Yeah.
Nervous irritability.
Wow! Holloway's pills, a marvelous tonic. You'll never need a high colonic. Ooh.
Scrofula or the king's evil can be cured by just one Holloway pill.
Unsocial inflammation, shoo.
Holloway
future hangovers is right here.
Sarah, you must stop reading the newspaper. I can't afford it.
I'd rather just read those letters you sent me in England before I could join you here.
You kept them?
Every one of them.
Why?
These words from my beloved, from far across the sea, were written in these letters and meant everything to me. Although they took so long to come, when sent from far off shores, the words that all the most welcome come at the end. My darling friend, I remain as ever yours. I remain as ever
Sarah and George Hand were now well established in their new city. They looked forward to a long, happy, and prosperous life in the capital of the growing colony of British Columbia. They could not have known how their circumstances would suddenly change. A devastating event was to occur, an event that would change the history of New Westminster forever. The story begins in Sapperton, in a house close to Noah's Ark, the name given to the Legislative Assembly's meeting place.
You know the legislature meets today.
Robert Kerr, Legislative Treasurer.
Over in Noah's Ark.
That drafty old place.
Mrs. Kerr, a somewhat reluctant resident of New Westminster.
You all catch your cold deaths from the cold there.
Yes, my dear. It could have been a fine building if some sort of warming it had been provided. I've invited a few members to join us and take preventative measures against the cold before the important business of the day.
What important business?
Well, nothing less than the choice of a capital city for our newly united colony.
Well, the only possible choice is Victoria. This Westminster is just a small village, one street along the waterfront, no proper shops to buy clothing, and peculiar people who spend their days sitting over hot stoves in public houses and all talk about politics. Just politics. I can't wait until you move the capital back to Victoria.
Well, that's what we plan to vote on today, but there is a problem.
A problem? What kind of problem?
Well, the legislature is full of good men, sound and trustworthy men, mostly appointed by Douglas while he was still governor. These men can be relied on to vote the right way.
Then what is the problem?
Oh, well, we also have these elected representatives, some unfortunately with quite independent minds, who've expressed doubts about our proposal. They could be persuaded to keep the capital here by a powerful speech by someone like Captain Franklin, the one we call the British Lion. So Franklin needs to be taken care of, and that's where you can help.
I like Captain Franklin. I enjoy his stories from when he was sailing around India.
We all like him. He's a very genial sort. But in this matter, he's against us.
How can I help?
Well, you are the mistress of a house that is very close to where we meet.
That smoky, cold Noah's Ark.
And I thought we might show a little hospitality to our dear friend, Captain Franklin, by serving him several hot whiskeys, merely to keep the cold out, of course, before we all go over for the afternoon session.
How will this help?
Well, I have observed that after several glasses of a certain beverage of Scottish origin, the usually persuasive Captain Franklin becomes muddled, almost incoherent, certainly less persuasive, and his short-sightedness gets even shorter. Now, if the good captain is not at his best this afternoon, he will not win the argument, we will win the vote, and the capital will go.
I will fetch an extra just in case. Captain Franklin, welcome to our home. We were just this moment talking about you. Come in and sit down. You must have a little hot toddy just to keep out the cold.
Why, thank you, Mrs. Kerr. A hot whiskey might be just what the doctor ordered.
Well, come along, William. Let's have several, just to be sure.
I think Mr. Cox will be joining us.
The famous New Westminster hospitality did the trick, but Kerr and Cox had one last trump card to play. That afternoon, before a legislature packed with the people, the crucial debate began.
The question before the Assembly is to humbly solicit the Governor to hold the next session of this Assembly in Victoria. Captain Franklin.
Mr. President, when I went up the Hooghly 40 years ago, the navigation was very intricate. The river full of shoals and sandbanks, a very great deal worse than the Fraser River. Look at the Hooghly now. Ships can go all the way to Calcutta. The sandbanks and shoals in the Fraser can be removed. Then Westminster will be as easily reached as Calcutta is now.
As my husband had planned, when Captain Franklin put aside the first page of his speech and cleaned his glasses, the discarded page is replaced. Poor Captain Franklin did not notice.
Mr. President, when I went up the Hooghly 40 years ago, the navigation was very intricate. The river full of shoals and sandbanks, a very great deal worse than the Fraser River. Look at the Hooghly now. Ships can go all the way to Calcutta. The sandbanks and shoals in the Fraser can be removed. Then Westminster will be as easily reached as Calcutta is now.
The plan worked so well the first time that the first page is replaced again. To ensure the complete confusion of Captain Franklin, my husband pushed the lenses of his glasses out.
Oh, thank you. Mr. President, when I went up the my glasses don't seem to be working very well. When I went up the Hooghly,
Mr. President, the good captain seems to be in some difficulty. It must be the extreme cold and discomfort of this assembly that has affected him. We should adjourn to the annex. I'm sure there'll be a remedy there for him.
Session is adjourned for 1/2 hour.
And that was the end of the debate. After a half hour partaking of additional beverages of a Scottish origin and the complete disappearance of the lenses of his glasses, Captain Franklin was even less able to be persuasive. All that remained was for the vote to be taken. The result was inevitable. The landowners, businessmen, and Douglas appointees, allied with members from the Caribou, were able to effect what was later called a desire for personal gain. The roll call begins. Dr. John Helmkin presiding.
Question before the Assembly is as follows. Be it resolved that were the seat of government at Victoria, it would be consonant with the desire of the public, advantageous to the administration, and to diminish the cost of government. The Council would urge that His Excellency the Governor be humbly solicited to cause the next session of this Legislative Council to be held in Victoria. As many as are of that opinion will say yea, as many as of the contrary opinion will say nay. Mr. Joseph Pemberton.
Landowner, Vancouver Island.
Yay!
Mr. Amor Cosmos.
Landowner, Victoria, bitter opponent of the Union of Vancouver Island with British Columbia. Fascinating character, deserves a musical of his own.
Yay!
Mr. Ball.
Magistrate, New Westminster.
Nay.
Mr. Henry Crease.
Attorney General, also from New Westminster.
Nay.
Mr. Edward Stamp.
Industrialist, well connected to Victoria.
Yay.
Mr. Southgate.
Victoria.
Yay!
Mr. Thomas Wood.
Caribou Gold Commissioner, appointed by Douglas.
Yay.
Mr. Brew.
Magistrate, New Westminster.
Nay.
The roll call continued with a predictable
Mr.
vote.
Peter O'Reilly.
Magistrate and Gold Commissioner,
Yay.
Victoria.
Mr. Joseph Tretch.
Public-spirited man with an excellent wine cellar, unfortunately from Victoria.
Yay!
Mr. McDonald.
Former Hudson's Bay employee and member for Souk, which is near Victoria.
Yay.
Mr. Robert Smith.
Member for Nanaimo, enemy of Victoria.
Nay!
Mr. George Welcome.
Member for Caribou, enemy of New Westminster.
Yay!
Mr. Robert Kerr.
Convivial host.
Yay!
Captain William Franklin.
Short-sighted and sloshed, but when sober, a vocal supporter of New Westminster.
Nay!
Mr. John Robson.
Editor of the British Columbian newspaper in New Westminster. Strongest advocate in keeping the capital here. Got revenge on Victoria later by becoming premier of the province. Nay! Oh, and local hero. Nay!
Dr. John Helmkin. Oh, that's me.
Editor of the British Columbian newspaper in New Westminster. Strongest advocate in keeping the capital here.
That's you.
Yeah, that's me. Landowner, Victoria. Long-time employee of the Hudson's Bay Company. Oh, and son-in-law of James Douglas.
President votes yea. On this resolution, 13 members having voted yea and 8 members having voted nay, the resolution is carried.
It took a further year for the capital to be moved, but the die was cast following this vote in Noah's Ark in Sabaton on March 29th, 1867. By the time the legislature next met, the wealthy elite of Victoria had done their work well. Governor Seymour immediately decamped for Victoria. The people of New Westminster were very angry. Revolution was in the air. All the population needed to get the uprising started was to gather our pitchforks and find a courageous leader and a good song. Well, I was that leader. We all own pitchforks. But where was the song?
Who stole our capital away? The capital we thought was here to stay. We had only just been named when the scenery was proclaimed. So who are the crooks who should be blamed? Who stole the capital from us? Hoping we would soon forget and never make a fuss. We want to know for sure if they are living in Victoria, those dirty, rotten thieves who stole our capital away. Who stole our capital away? Yes, what have those criminals to say? Oh, their crimes they are denying, but we all know they are lying. Their lips were moving, sound was coming out. We must take this betrayal personally. Let's catch these traitors, jail them, and then throw away the key. 'Cause what we know for certain is behind their oak bay curtains sit the dirty, rotten thieves who stole our capital away. Was it island politicians who were lying through their teeth?
Was it businessmen with interests always hidden underneath?
Were there far too many members who had worked for Hudson's Bay?
Was it drunken legislators who forgot to have their say?
Was it merchants from Victoria who were scared of losing trade?
Was it newly minted tops with reputations to be made?
Out of all the answers we consider, one we really love, it wasn't any one of them, it's all of the above. All of the above.
It's no use that everyone complains. There is just one question that remains.
Should we try to get the capital back? Should we put this proposition to Don Black?
make a legislature raid just to find that all our emails were mislaid. John Robson wrote so long ago, he's our hero. He's our hero.
Sometimes your plans will all work out in ways you couldn't know. We swap politicians lying for a jail and a big asylum, traded crooks in politics for thieves and lunatics, gave up legislative men and got Woodlands and the pen. So we got the better deal, I'd say. Yes, but they still stole our capital away. Pitchforks can be purchased and petitions can be signed by the people, we the people, post-performance.
After the capital left for Victoria, times were hard for a while, but gradually George's business expanded. He was able to buy a hardware store, and with all the new trade, we were able to afford a big house on Agnes Street. We could also afford to employ a Chinese houseboy, Chung Wei. We loved him, and he stayed with us as our cook until he died. He had a son, Chung Ko, whom we have known since he was born. His father did not leave him very much when he died, except a small box we found in his room. Chung Wei called it the Box of the 5 Miracles. We gave it to Chung Ko.
He came from China to look for gold. And make his fortune, so he'd be told. A man who thought he would never grow old, leaving a wife in China far away, hoping they'd meet again someday. Although the debts he owed, he'd never pay.
My father was one of the first to come here to Jimsan, the Gold Mountain. He had no work in China. Rebellion and starvation was everywhere. He heard of the gold strikes in America, and he came expecting to make his fortune. He would owe so much money to the labor contractor who paid his fare. Yet, he still came hoping to make his fortune.
The gold was very quickly gone. The debts he owed went on and on. Worked on the telegraph to Gwinnett. The job was hard, a worker's life was hell. But every winter time to rest, enjoy the gambling life he loved the best, and smoke the opium pipe here in New West.
So many of the workers who came with my father stayed here in Yifao. Yifao, the second port, New Westminster. We had the largest Chinatown in British Columbia. We were merchants, laundrymen, and market gardeners. We would feed and dress the white men. And yet, My father could not vote, could not own land, should not work for others. But he survived the first miracle. He never let me see this gift he left for me. Talked about his life. Too much sadness, too many troubles. But I know that some years ago, my mother came from China to join him. And then I was born. Another miracle. My father then had some very good fortune. He became a houseboy for the Han family. Perhaps a third miracle. Mrs. Han gave him this picture. It is of my father with their family. To have this picture to remember him by is the fourth miracle. Left to me. Here's a box containing a whole life, treasures of a lifetime. These treasures sealed by loves inside his memory box. He never let me see this gift he left for me. My father has been laying in the house for 5 days. We must set off Biosue fireworks to tell our friends that today is his funeral day. We have put out special food in front of the house. A roasted chicken and boiled pig smell wonderful. You can hear the gongs from the joss house sounding every few minutes. All the decorations are up. Look at the beautiful flags and streamers. And there will be a great procession today. My father will be buried, but he must not be forgotten. One day we will want to dig his bones up and return him to the land where he was born. Until that day, we must protect his grave with candles and paper squares with tiny holes in them to keep the evil spirits out. The day we take him back to China is the day of the fifth miracle. Put away thought of time, shut away from view, always hidden out of sight. Soon, we were living in peace. It was so exciting. Electricity was brought here, and soon after came the interurban tram. We could visit family all the way to Vancouver. I got a job as a cleaner at a large business in Chinatown, Ying, Tai and Company, on 10th Street in Carnarvon. I was working there on the night of September 10th, 1898, when I saw a small red glowing light down by the river, just by where the paddle boats tie up. I watched, but could not believe what I saw. I had to tell someone. I can see a tiny glow down by the river where the paddle steamers lie. Flames are leaping upward. Watch the way they light the blackened evening sky. I heard some people say there's a fire in some hay, started by a spark somewhere out there in the dark, on Front Straddle Wharf, down by Brackman and Kerr's alleyway.
It wasn't my fault.
A tramp sleeping it off by the river.
It was one of them passing paddle wheelers, that's what it was. I saw sparks flying from the engine right into the bales of hay. But they don't blame me!
It's 11 o'clock and all's not well.
The fire chief.
I telegraphed for help from Vancouver. I can hear the fire bell ringing as the Hyatt Fire Department rushes down. The wind is blowing strongly and the flames are spreading quickly through the town. The wharf has caught fire. The flames are climbing higher. Boats are pushed along. Oh, the tide is much too strong. The Gladys and the Edgar and the Bonaccord are burning. It is dire.
In Linton Square, all the buildings are alight. No place is safe. New fires are everywhere. Look, the Hotel Caledonian, City Market, and the Webster building gone. Canadian Pacific Navigation's lost. The firemen have withdrawn. Front Street hoses burned.
Which way's the fire turned?
The firemen are entrapped, and 2 fires have overlapped.
The people up on Agnes Street are moving out. Yes, everyone's concerned.
My house is on Agnes Street. The fire is spreading up the hill. It's all bad news. And now I hear that Holy Trinity is a mere outline in their storm. The bells have all been melted and the tower is just standing on its own. The Reverend Children saw a wheelbarrow and therefore the candlesticks were saved and a lectern Douglas gave when Sir James was still the governor of the province many, many years before.
My beloved church is destroyed.
Alfred Shildrick, rector of Holy Trinity.
Our precious bells have been melted. Only a few treasures saved. This has happened to us before, but we are still here. We shall build again. The walls are burned, but they still stand. The tower remains intact. But our bells, our melting bells. Perhaps it will not look so bad in the morning.
But morning came, and what we saw looked even worse than we had imagined. For some, the shock had been too much. Mun Lee, the head of Kwang Wing Lung, dropped dead after he saw a dreadful sight. $20,000 worth of opium in his store was burned last night.
This was no tale or lie, and though some tried to deny, what had made so many cry was that only the flames got high.
Families evacuated, homes that must be recreated. But we knew as we watched and waited, Stump City would rise again, like a phoenix from the ashes. Sure as winter brings rain, we knew that Stump City earth before, but it would rise triumphant.
are about to hear is true. Only the facts have been changed to protect the innocent. It was Sunday, September the 15th, 1911. I was working the night shift out of the police station on Columbia Street. It was dark in New Westminster. The city was sleeping, and so was I. It was 5:49 a.m. when a Chinese man staggered into the station and woke me up. I recognized him at once. His name was Chung Ko. I knew him. He was the janitor at the Bank of Montreal next door. I had seen him going to work about 2 hours before. The boss is Chief of Police Bradshaw. My name's Monday. This is gonna be big. If I can solve this case, maybe they'll name a park after me. I question, Chung. You say there's been a robbery?
Yes.
At a bank?
At Montreal, where I work.
You did it!
No, not me. They tied me up.
Who did?
Men who broke in.
Why didn't you stop them?
They were in the bank when I came to work, in the big vault. I just cleaned the place.
How many men?
I don't know. They covered my eyes when they tied me to a chair.
What did they take?
Everything in the vault they could carry.
This robbery attracted interest from reporters all over North America. The New York Times were here, the Chicago Tribune too. We would like to think that CKNW covered this story as well, but certain logistical difficulties got in the way. Bill Hughes was off annoying unsuspecting tourists on tour buses. It was too early for Jack Cullen to prowl and too late for Frosty Force to work. Neil McRae was busy thinking up nice things to say about athletes and having no success whatsoever. Oh, and the fact that the station would not be established for another 30 years created other difficulties. But if they had been there, one of their dynamic young reporters might have asked.
So, Chief Bradshaw, how much was actually taken?
About $320,000. They took all the large bills and the gold. Silver and small bills were left on the clerk's tape.
Why was there so much money in the bank?
Well, it was to pay the salmon fishermen and for payrolls at Fraser Mills and for the hop pickers at Chilliwack and Agassiz.
How exactly did they open the vault?
Well, the robbers used a pick to tear away bricks from the wall of the vault on the cellar stairway. Corners and cracks were filled in with nitroglycerin. Probably only one charge was needed.
Mr. Bradshaw, the police station is less than 10 yards away. Why did your officer hear nothing? Was he asleep?
Certainly not. Betting from the clerk's room plugged the hole in the wall.
Where was the clerk? We were told he slept at the bank.
The manager had sent him to the Cloverdale branch.
Really? The manager? What if I were to tell you that sometime later the manager would retire and buy the largest estate in Queen's Park?
Yeah. Typical unfounded media speculation.
How did the robbers get away?
We have a report of a powerful motor car being stolen from Mr. T.J. Trapp's garage. We found it abandoned up on Royal Avenue. They probably used that.
Who do you think did this?
Well, judging by the thoroughness of the job and the tools that were used, I believe it was the same gang that's been working in Vancouver.
Chief Bradshaw, this is supposed to be a very secure bank. How did the robbers even get in?
Well, that's easy. From the outside.
With this immortal response, the questions ended. Sometime later, some of the stolen money was found under a wooden sidewalk on 4th Street. During the next 2 years, several people were arrested with some of the money from the robbery in their possession. Martin Powell was arrested in Detroit with $2,500. His trial here resulted first in a deadlocked jury, then in an acquittal, after which he left immediately for the USA. Oh, he was shot to death several years later.
We do not know what happened to most of the money, but we do know that New Westminster was the site of the greatest bank robbery on the North American continent.
The robbery of the century!
It soon is 1917. There's no peace anymore. Young men from New Westminster sign up to go to war, while families wait nervously for their lads on a farm.
March 15th, 1917. Dear Mother, I am so tired of sitting in a mud-filled trench waiting for the war to continue. They tell us that these fields of mud used to be covered with beautiful red poppies, as far as the eye could see. Well, there are no poppies anymore. The rain and the constant traffic of feet have crushed them into oblivion. Next time you send a parcel, I would like a pair of socks. It is so very quiet as I write this. I hope nothing comes to disturb the silence of the night. When it is quiet, we are still safe.
Stay safe, son. Please stay safe.
Oh, blow the wind gently o'er the red fields of Picardy. Play the horn softly if you're going to advance. So beat the drum faintly so you don't wake the enemy. Enough blood is staining the far-off fields of France.
France, June 23rd, 1917. Dear Ma, since I wrote last, we have done another turn of front line and are now again in the supports. I'm now in charge of a Hotchkiss gun with a crew of 3 men. Last week, 30 desperados from the regiment, including myself, made a raid on the Boche line and captured 18 of the enemy, besides killing quite a number. And we got back to our own line without a man getting a scratch. The general shook each of us by the hand and said that since the beginning of the war, he'd not seen a better piece of work. Say, Ma, if you got any cake or cookies around, I'd like to taste some, as we don't get anything like that out here. As ever, your loving son, Arthur.
Be careful, son. We are all so proud of you, but please be careful.
So take each step slowly in the bloodied mud of Picardy. Wave the flag proudly if you should get your chance. Please load the guns safely. They do enough injury when killing the enemy in the far-off fields of France.
We are the 104th Westminster Fusiliers. These are our battle honors.
We fought at Mount Sorel. We were present at the Somme, Ancre Heights, and Arras.
We died at Vimy Ridge.
We captured Hill 70.
We were there at Ypres and Passchendaele, Amiens, Scarpe, Drocourt-Quéant.
We battled for the Hindenburg Line and the Canal de Nord.
We were victorious at Valenciennes.
These are our battle honors. We are the 104th Westminster Fusiliers.
Flanders, November 17th, 1917. I suppose you want to know how I felt the first time under fire. Well, I'll tell you what every man will if he speaks the truth. I was frightened. Everyone is frightened under shell fire, but the thing is not to show it. If an officer ducks and runs for cover, he may as well quit, because he's through as far as his men are concerned. They always look to their officer, and if they trust him, he can ask them to do anything, and they'll do it. I've got to go up and take a trench building party now, so must quit and put on my high boots. Had a little sciatica and chilblains. That's all so far. Love, Jim.
But the blood of the soldiers who won't see
that tomorrow the big push will come. In many ways, I look forward to it after all this time waiting around in these stinking trenches. But in other ways, I dread it, as we do not know what resistance we will meet tomorrow. However this comes out, please know that I will love you always.
As ever, your loving son, Henry.
But even the worst of war's end, we were the lucky ones. We survived. And finally, we were on our way home.
Now our fighting is done, all our battles are won. We can't wait to get back home again. Halifax on a ship, just a short ocean trip, and then ride across country by train. Now the Great War is past, we are back home at last to reclaim what is left of our lives, which will be bittersweet and remain incomplete if we spend it without a good wife. But a wife of that kind is not easy to find when we haven't a great deal to bring.
Well, I think you might find many girls will be kind if you fought for your country and king.
And these dreams could come true.
I could share them with you
In a house in the brow of the hill. Now the fighting is done, all the battles are won, and it's time that we too settle down. Buy a house, what a thrill, on the brow of the hill. It's an excellent part of the town. We'll raise a family, 3 daughters and 3 sons.
Oh, is that all? We'll start a business that will make enough to satisfy us all.
Our sons will make us proud, and for the Salmon Valleys play one day.
Our daughters will, I say, be crowned as new Westminster's Queen of May.
See children dancing, looking cute, their joy is absolute. Hear the Hayek and the batteries loud salute. Yes, the fighting is done and the battles are won, and we're back in our hometown again. For the rest of our lives, we'll stay home with our wives. Well, for a few years at least.
In a house on the brow of the hill.
A house on the brow of the hill. A house. We're aware what we've been missing, picnicking and going fishing, but we've got what we've been missing. We've come home at last.
So, June and I were married, and we moved into our little house on Edinburgh Street. New houses were being built all over the city. The Hayward family built a large new house in Queen's Park. There were rooms for the servants and a den for Mr. Hayward. There were 6 bedrooms and even an indoor bathroom. But the most important room was the front parlor. Important meals were eaten here. Great-grandparents were laid out and buried from here. But its most important function was as the meeting place over afternoon tea for the ladies of the neighborhood. Every week, they would gather with their copies of the Columbian clutched tightly to their bosoms, ready to read the latest news of what their neighbors had been doing, and more importantly, read between the lines of what had been reported. A scene of idyllic tranquility, total propriety, and, well, he'll tell you the rest. Some elegant music, please.
It's a lovely
at Mrs. Hayward. Mrs. Hayward has a large house in Queen's Park. There are ladies frequently who might gather there for tea, but they're really getting ready to embark on a voyage of divine discovery, of who's dating whom and who's been caught in adultery. Oh! And it's going to be a toss-up who comes up with the juiciest gossip. Mrs. Hayward, Mrs. Johnston, Mrs. Evans, Mrs. Abbott, not for me.
We've been reading all the latest in the papers, and though we don't believe a word, that's what we do. There are stories we suspect wouldn't possibly be correct, because we'd all be shocked if they were true.
And horrified too.
Read the tales of lurid conduct by our neighbors. Tales that must be true because they're in the press. Yes!
Secrets that were always hidden in the dark.
No longer are concealed.
All of them are revealed when we're gathering the gossip from Queen's Park. Gathering the gossip from Queen's Park. Oh, I love the tea. Thank you. You heard about the twins?
They're not twins, I told you that.
No. Dear ladies, it's a lovely afternoon at Mrs. Hayward. Mrs. Hayward has a house on 2nd Street. All her neighbors try to hide what is going on inside, but their secrets are not safe when we girls meet.
No, they're not safe.
Oh, that was lovely. Mr. Collins, famous for his shiny Bentley, goes out driving late at night alone with their parlour maid.
Oh, I knew it.
And they park down by the steamboat landing, and what goes on's not very upstanding. And Miss Hayward, Mrs. Johnston, Mrs. Evans, Mrs. Abbott not agree.
Oh, dear, I thought they had a lovely marriage, but it's not.
Now the Wilson lass is going to have a baby.
And we all know who we think the father is.
And so she's been hidden away till she's past delivery day.
And the father has left town on urgent business.
So they say.
Did you hear that Alfred Finney stole some money?
Do tell.
From the bank where he's chief teller, so they tell.
Oh,
well, now the judge will give him time inside the pen. His troubles make us sad. We always feel so bad when we're
gathering the gossip from Queen's Park. Gathering the gossip from Queen's Park. We hear Eve Brown has run away to Paris, and her loving husband's left in quite a fix.
Junior Jonas' feeble brain has been addled by cocaine, and he needs another way to get his fix.
That's what he needs.
Dr. Rockwell is the talk of the whole city. He has cancelled all appointments for next week.
And what is even worse, he had dinner with his nurse. Oh, the horror! Oh, the shame! I just can't speak.
She's been struck down. Now you think that hearing all this news would shock us, and that we're learning words respectable folk don't know. So, as many of us not is given to read more.
Gossip keeps us all alive. We doubt that we'd survive.
With help gathering the gossip from Queen's Park, we love our neighbors. Gathering the gossip from Queen's Park, they are our saviors. Gathering the gossip from Queen's Park.
this afternoon.
How about a gin sling, Joe?
Henry, I am so happy we didn't live among those rich people in Queen's Park.
Oh.
I couldn't bear spending all that time just listening to gossip.
Life should be fun.
Like it was when we were courting. And your mother tried to catch you sneaking out of the house to come and see me.
Yes, she never got over the fact that when I came back from the war, I was already 23 years old, not a little boy anymore.
It wasn't that we were trying to do anything wrong. We never went over to that speakeasy in Queensborough.
Didn't we? Oh, no, we didn't.
But there was one thing we did that nobody ever criticized us for, because they were all doing it all the time. Not that, dear. Remember how we would take a ride on the tram, on the interurban? Now, nobody could complain about that. Although, I admit we didn't always ride it for the same reason our parents did.
Yes, we would gather up our friends, go down to the depot on Columbia Street so our folks didn't see us getting on, and ride everywhere.
And you would scrunch down really low in your seat so you're going up Park Row so your mother wouldn't see you as the tram passed by her window, which she spent a lot of time looking out of. Those were some of the happiest times we ever spent when we were courting.
And we could go all the way out to Steveston or even Chilliwack, and then flip the seats over and ride all the way back on the same tram.
For a few pennies, we could ride into Vancouver, if we wanted to.
Those were the days. Too bad they're long past.
You may be past it, but I'm still young enough to remember them. And all our friends that would climb aboard the tram with us.
Oh, we traveled with pride every time we would ride on the old interurban line. When our parents allowed, we'd go out with the crowd just as long as we're home before 9. As we rattle along, grab a strap and hang on, life is great, peachy keen, life is fine. Shouting all aboard, traveling like a lord on the old interurban line, on the old interurban line.
I would pack a splendid picnic. We'd leave as early as we could and go as far as possible out into the Fraser Valley, almost beyond civilization.
But not beyond hope?
We all know what you were hoping for.
If we had a free day, we could go all the way on the tram out to Chilliwack.
Spend the day having fun, getting brown in the sun,
And then ride the tram all the way back.
There's a route we can take out to Burnaby Lake, past Grade Street and Cumberland Road, speeding on until we must go uphill, but the old interurban might show it could go with the heaviest load.
You try to be first on the tram, so you go to the downtown depot. Past Leopold Place over Royal, then go uphill to Park Row.
Along First Street until you're on 3rd Avenue, and then wowee! In no time at all, you'd but find that you made it to Burnaby.
If you're the sort often thought of as a shaker and a mover, you'd run the line every day all the way to Vancouver.
You mightn't believe it, but there have been evenings when we've been all of the way to the end of the line out in Steveston.
You could go for a whirl with your favorite girl, and there'd just be a few cents to pay. As it clanged down the track, we would sit at the back, holding hands in an innocent way.
In the late afternoon, or by light of a moon, my
on the old interurban line. Now they take an axe and they've torn up the tracks. Yes, they've shot every part of it down, thinking we wouldn't mind if we all had to find an alternative way into town. So we drive and complain, or we crowd the sky train, but our memories don't fade or decline.
We shouted all aboard. We traveled like a lord
On the old interurban line, on the old interurban line. Oh, how we'd adore just to ride once more on that old interurban line. One more time would be really just fine. Where's James? Why isn't he home?
He's gone out with some friends. They're riding the interurban out to Steveston.
Steveston? You let him go all the way to Steveston? Do you know what that means?
Yes. Like father, like son.
Oh, how we'd adore just to ride once more on that old interurban line.
Time moved on. The kids who had done their courting on the interurban became parents who worried what their children were doing while they were riding on the tram.
Time kept moving on. The face of New Westminster was changing. New houses were being built all the way up to the boringly named 23rd Street, over in the actual Queensboro and around Moody Park.
And still time kept moving on. Soon the 1920s would be over. Momentous events were about to envelop the planet. And yet, in New Westminster, one thing remains constant, defying all change, all upheaval, all modern progress.
The Fraser, our river of life, continued to flow as it had for centuries, past the Ewan canneries, past thriving sawmills, and past the dock from where the K ferry used to depart on its way into the wilds of Surrey.
A river carrying loaded timber rafts, overfilled fishing boats, giant sturgeon on an infinite journey. The 20s came and the whole world played, and still the river rolled on.
We knew our price would soon be paid, but still the river rolled on.
The 30s brought top Tory times. Its importing days were long gone.
The unemployed were unenjoyed, and all the time the Fraser flowed on. Roll on, river, river, roll on. You'll still be rolling past my city when I am gone. Flow by Fraser, Fraser, flow by. You'll still be flowing past my city after I die.
40s came with another war, and still the river rolled on.
The kind of war we had seen before, like a river that always rolled on.
all, but we are sure the Fraser flowed on.
Peace and love, man. Peace and love. Peace and love. Peace and love. Be yours when I am gone.
Go by Fraser, Fraser, flow by. You'll still be flowing past my city after I die.
Hit it, man!
The 70s rolled into town, feeling like the 20s again.
Oh, when Elvis died and the whole world cried, but we discovered Punch McLean.
Moving through the hockey world with brilliant habits and brawn.
A controversy always swirled.
So many garbage cans were hurled.
Cup-winning banners were unfurled, and all the time the Fraser flowed on. Roll, Westminster, river, roll on. You'll still be rolling past my city when I am gone.
New Westminster salmon bellies, 24 great Med Cup wins, 1880s women's baseball, Justin Morneau, Smith the twins. Bruins gave us Billy Redford, Ronning, Brent Hughes, and Stansfield. David Steen, whose shot put was unreal.
The 90s came and the 90s went, and still the river flowed on.
Great towers were built on Quayside Drive, but still the river rolled on.
The river heaves.
Oh, yeah.
The condos leave.
Oh, dear.
Decaying doorway of the town.
But one thing sure, forevermore, we know the Fraser River flows on. So much to be proud of, with so much joy, so many tears, so much we have accomplished in only 150 years.
There are so many people's lives lived out here.
So many dreams come true.
So much we can feel proud of.
And so much left to do. We honor all those who came before us.
And we celebrate the lands from whence they came, giving a city its rich culture, its great heritage, and even its name.
Out of China, out of India, and from all over Europe came brave-hearted pioneers.
To join the Kinkai tribe beside the Fraser for our first 150 years.
What would our brave pioneers have to say? Would they recognize their city if
They were here today. Would they wonder where the timber mills have gone? Why revered ancestral graves are built upon? And if the spirits of the dead are trapped there still, would they find it strange that Woodlands now is called Victoria Hill?
Would they worry there's no
salmon canneries here?
I would.
Would they grieve there's no place left that makes good beer?
I would.
Would they miss the presence of an opium den? Would they notice what remains now of the famous BC pen?
Would they believe how many countries we come from? From the Philippines, El Salvador, and Guam.
Where? From Somalia, Australia, Singapore.
Iceland, Chile, and Jamaica, Cameroon, and many more.
Would they believe we'd always have a Chinatown?
Would they then see St. Mary's hospitals torn down?
But the K2K's not here today.
The Bruins play in the USA, and long-time fishermen know well the salmon runs have gone to hell. But others have left, and we proudly can note
How Justin Monos in Minnesota.
Raymond Burr became the face of Perry Mason. That's no disgrace.
And some went far when they left this place. And Robert Thirsk went into
Hollywood or outer space, they all had come from a special place where once there was a land unspoiled, where mighty mountains touched the sky. Ancient forests, golden slopes, and giant Fraser flowed right by. On its banks an ancient tribe, born to hunt and to fish and to dive. Every year was just the same, the salmon ran and the hurricane came.
Then the gold rush arrived, and everything changed.
This is where we shall build. We must keep the Americans out.
I declare and proclaim the town heretofore called and known as Queensborough, and sometimes as Queenborough, from henceforth shall be known as New Westminster.
They call it Stump City, 'cause all around, all you saw were giant tree stumps stuck in the ground.
I had become so habituated to my surroundings that I was rather surprised at this depreciatory view of my household.
Mrs. Moresby is prepared to receive a few young ladies as boarders.
Mr. President, when I went up the Hooghly 40 years ago,
We traded crooks in politics for thieves and lunatics. So we got the better deal, I'd say.
Here's a box containing our love, treasures of a lifetime.
It was Sunday, September the 15th, 1911. I was working the night shift out of the police station on Columbia Street. It was dark in New Westminster. The city was sleeping, and so was I.
The mud has dried up, and the poppies have grown again. They've blossomed and withered.
oh, it's a lovely afternoon at Mrs. Hayward.
We don't